The massive iron gates of the Harbour Heights estate did not just close, they slammed shut in my face like a guillotine. My own son stood on the other side and told me I did not fit their brand image. He forgot that every brick of his billion-dollar empire rested on a foundation I built. I gripped the wheel of my sedan until my knuckles turned white. He wants to shut me out. I will show him who actually holds the keys to the kingdom. My name is Margaret Keene, but the world has always known me simply as Maggie. At 62 years of age, I thought I was done with fighting battles. Yet here I was, shivering inside my 10-year-old sedan outside the iron gates of Harbour Heights. The late autumn wind whipped through the manicured hedges of this ultra-wealthy suburb, stripping the last of the gold leaves from the oaks. It was a cold afternoon, the kind that settles in your bones and refuses to leave. I had driven across 3 state lines to be here for the Family and Investors Gala, a title that felt heavy with promise. My coat was worn at the elbows, and my hands were dry from the long drive. But my heart was full, because I was going to see my son. I rolled down the window and pressed the access card against the sensor. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time, as if sheer will could force the electronic barrier to recognize me. The light blinked an angry red. "Ma'am, please reverse the vehicle." A voice crackled through the intercom. "My name is Maggie Keene," I said, leaning toward the speaker. "I am Ryan Keene's mother. The system must be down. One moment." I sat there, feeling exposed. The security camera mounted on the pillar buzzed as it focused on me. I could almost feel the lens zooming in, dissecting the fraying collar of my coat and the grey hair that I had not had time to dye. The gate did not open. Instead, the heavy oak front door of the mansion at the top of the driveway swung wide. Ryan stepped out. My breath caught in my throat. He looked like a prince in his tailored suit, every inch the CEO of Nova Vantage Labs. Beside him stood Olivia, his wife, draped in shimmering silk that cost more than my car. Behind them, I could see the flash of cameras and the bustle of waiters setting up champagne towers. They were preparing for a photo shoot. They did not wave. They walked down the driveway toward the gate, their steps brisk and synchronized. Olivia whispered something to Ryan, her face tight with irritation. When they reached the other side of the bars, Ryan did not reach through to hold my hand. He kept his hands in his pockets. "Mom," Ryan said, his voice flat. "Tonight is investors only," Olivia says. "Well, she says you don't fit the image we are building. You should go." I blinked, certain I had misheard him. "What, Ryan?" "I drove for 2 days. You told me to come early to help watch the grandchildren while you managed the press." Ryan looked away, shifting his weight. That was before the PR team finalized the strategy. "We need a unified narrative for the IPO launch. You know how the market is?" "The market?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am your mother." Olivia stepped forward, her smile thin and devoid of warmth. "Maggie, please try to understand. Our children don't need viral photos where you look like the help. Sorry, but it's unprofessional to mix demographics like this." The air left my lungs. It was not a physical blow, but it hurt far worse. Ryan checked his watch, avoiding my eyes. He signaled to the guard booth, opened the gate just enough for her to turn around. The massive iron wings of the gate groaned and parted. I stared at my son, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to laugh and say it was a cruel joke. He just stared back, his face a mask of corporate indifference. "Go home. Mom," he said softly. "We will send a check for the gas." The gate began to close again, slowly, deliberately. I saw my reflection in the growing expanse of iron bars, a small, grey woman in a cheap car, looking utterly defeated. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the car door open and hammer my fists against the metal. My hand reached for the handle, but then it froze. A memory flashed through my mind, sharp and violent. I saw my hand 20 years ago, holding a cheap ballpoint pen, signing a second mortgage on my home. I saw myself handing over a check to a young, terrified Ryan so he could buy his first server. I remembered every contract, every guarantee, every piece of paper I had signed to build the ground he was now standing on. He thought I was just an old woman from Oklahoma. He forgot who taught him how to count. I shifted the gear into reverse. I did not look back at them. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned the color of bone. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging, but my mind was suddenly crystal clear. "Fine," I whispered to the empty car. "You shut the door on me. Let's see whose doors really belong to whom." I spun the wheel and drove away from the mansion. In the rearview mirror, a burst of gold and red fireworks exploded into the twilight sky, celebrating the success of the Keene family. But ahead of me, there was only the long, dark road and the rhythmic slash of streetlights cutting through the night. A storm was brewing inside that car, and they had no idea it was coming for them. The drive away from Harbour Heights felt endless, the silence in the car broken only by the hum of the heater. My mind drifted back more than 20 years, far away from these gated mansions, to the dusty streets of Ruston Falls, Oklahoma. I was a different woman then. I was a specialized auditor for the IRS who had taken early retirement to care for a sick parent, and then to care for a son who had been abandoned by his father. I knew how to track a hidden asset across 3 shell companies, but I was blind to the ambition growing under my own roof. Ryan was always brilliant, but he was also ashamed. I remember him at 16, standing on our porch, aggressively scraping the red Oklahoma mud off his sneakers. He looked at our peeling siding with genuine disdain. "I am going to get out of this mud pit," he told me one evening, his voice shaking with teenage intensity. "I don't belong here. Mom, I belong somewhere where the streets are paved, not dirt. I am going to be someone." I just smiled and made him dinner, not realizing that his definition of someone required him to pretend I was no one. When he got into a prestigious tech program, we did not have the money for the high-end equipment he needed. I looked at my left hand. The diamond wedding band was the only thing of value I possessed. I went to the pawn shop downtown and sold it for $2,000. I bought him his first high-performance laptop. I felt a swell of pride as I handed it to him, but it was mixed with a cold, sinking fear. I was giving him the tools to build a world I could not enter. A few years later, he was back in my garage, sweating over servers he had built from scrap parts. He called it Keene Analytics. He needed seed money to keep the servers running, or the business would die before it started. I did not hesitate. I went to the bank and took out a second mortgage on the house. It was a terrifying risk for a single mother on a fixed income. To protect me, my old friend, Mr. Doyle, a small-town lawyer with coffee stains on his ties, drafted a simple operating agreement. He set up a holding company called MK and Son Holdings, LLC. "Maggie, you are putting up the house," Doyle had said. "You get 60% of the voting stock. It is the only way to ensure you don't lose the roof over your head." Ryan signed the papers without reading them, grinning at me across the kitchen table. Sure. Mum? 60%? Whatever you want. When I am rich, you won't need a piece of paper. You will have your own suite in my penthouse. You will never have to worry about a mortgage again. I believed him. I took that document and locked it in my cheap fireproof safe, treating it like a sentimental drawing from his childhood rather than a financial asset. As the company grew and morphed into Nova Vantage Labs, they moved to California. Venture capitalists started circling like sharks smelling blood. I stayed in Oklahoma, but the distance grew in other ways. I visited him once in San Francisco for a launch party. That was when I first understood my place. I was standing in a corner holding a can of beer when Olivia, just his girlfriend then, glided over. "Oh, Maggie," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that did not reach her eyes. "We have a sommelier at the bar serving vintage Pinot. The beer can is a little, well, it doesn't really fit the personal branding of a tech founder's family. Does it?" I put the beer down, feeling my face burn. Over the next few years, the calls from Ryan became infrequent. When he did call, it was brief. He stopped inviting me to events because my clothes were from department stores and my stories were about the neighbors, not the stock market. Then came the day the courier arrived with a thick stack of documents. Ryan called me, sounding breathless and important. "Mum, the lawyers for the new Series A investors are demanding a restructuring," he said. "We need to clean up the cap table to let the big money in. It is just standard legal stuff. Just sign where the sticky notes are and send it back overnight." I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he used to do his homework. I trusted him. I trusted my son. I signed page after page without reading the fine print. But 30 years of working for the government had drilled a habit into me that not even motherly love could erase. Before I sealed the envelope, I took out my digital camera. I snapped a clear, high-resolution photo of the signature page and the complex addendum attached to the back. I printed a copy and filed it in the safe next to the original LLC agreement. I thought I was just being organized. I did not realize I had just preserved the only weapon that could bring down the empire he was building on my back. The cracks did not appear overnight. They started as hairline fractures months before the gate slammed in my face. Subtle shifts that I tried to ignore until they became chasms I could not cross. I remember the birthday party for my grandson, Leo, 3 months ago. It was held at a Michelin-starred restaurant where the napkins felt heavier than my bedsheets. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, a floral print from the rack at the department store that I thought looked cheerful. But when the staff seated us, I found myself placed at the far end of the long mahogany table near the kitchen service door. Ryan and Olivia stood at the head of the table, bathed in the soft glow of the chandeliers. They looked like royalty. A photographer was snapping photos rapidly, chin up. "Everyone big smiles for the website," the photographer shouted. I stood up to join them, smoothing down my dress. A young woman with a clipboard and a headset intercepted me before I could take 2 steps. She was from the Nova Vantage public relations team. "Mrs. Keene," she said, her voice dropping to a polite whisper. "Could you maybe sit this one out? The image team really wants to focus on the dynamic, young executive energy today, just for the shareholders' update. You understand?" I sat back down, my face burning. I watched as they pulled the frame tighter, cutting out the empty chair where I should have been. Later, while I was cutting a piece of the artisanal cake, I heard Olivia talking to a journalist near the bar. Her voice was confident, practiced. Oh, absolutely, Olivia said, swirling her wine. Ryan comes from a very stable background. Both of his parents were academics, actually. Very middle class. Very intellectual. We have never known want. I froze, the fork halfway to my mouth. Academics stable. My husband ran off when Ryan was 4. I cleaned houses on weekends when the tax office salary wasn't enough. I felt a strange sensation, as if I were being erased from history while I was still breathing. After the party, I went to the restroom to splash cold water on my face. I was about to exit the stall when the door opened, and I heard the click of high heels. It was Olivia and Ryan. You have to talk to her. Ryan. Olivia hissed, the way she laughs, the way she eats. It's embarrassing. You cannot drag my family into that working-class aesthetic. It confuses the brand. Liv. She's my mum, Ryan said, but his voice was weak. She is a liability, Olivia snapped. When I confronted Ryan about it days later, he refused to look me in the eye. It is just personal branding. Mum, he said, rubbing his temples. The market hates family drama. Investors want a clean story. It would help if you, well, if you limited your appearances at big events. It keeps things light for me, just until the IPO is done. I tried to bridge the gap the only way I knew how. A week later, I drove to the Nova Vantage headquarters with a box of his favorite oatmeal raisin cookies. I walked up to the front desk, smiling at the receptionist. I am here to see Ryan Keene, I said. I am his mother. The young man typed something into his computer, then frowned. I am sorry. Ma'am, you are not on the guest list. You will have to wait. I waited for 2 hours on a sleek, uncomfortable leather bench in the glass-walled lobby. Finally, the elevator doors opened. Ryan walked out, surrounded by 3 men in expensive suits. He was laughing, his teeth white and perfect. He looked right at me. Our eyes met. I stood up, clutching the plastic container of cookies. Ryan. He did not stop. He did not even blink. He turned his head back to the tall man beside him and kept walking, straight out the revolving doors. I stood there, stunned, until the receptionist called out, Ma'am, Ms. Keene, Mrs. Keene instructed me to tell you that the CEO is in closed-door meetings all day. You should go. That night, alone in a cheap motel room because I did not want to drive back in the dark, I sent him a text message. I just wanted to hug my son. That is all. The reply came an hour later. It was cold, precise, and sounded like it had been drafted by a lawyer. Mom, you are making this hard for me. My life is different now. I have responsibilities you don't understand. Please respect my space. The final blow came not in person, but through the silence of my grandchildren. On the rare occasions I was allowed to video call them, they looked at me with polite confusion. Olivia had stopped calling me Grandma. I heard her in the background correcting them. Say goodbye to Grandma Maggie from Oklahoma, she said. As if I were a distant relative they had met once at a reunion. There were no pictures of me in their house. I had checked the background of their video feeds. The walls were covered in abstract art and photos of Ryan and Olivia on yachts. I had been scrubbed clean. Then came the email. It arrived 3 days before the gate incident, sent from Olivia's personal account, but clearly meant for the record. Dear Maggie, regarding the upcoming investor gala, we think it is best if you sit this one out temporarily. Your current wardrobe and manner of speaking are inconsistent with the brand narrative we are presenting to Wall Street. We will send you photos. I read that email until the words blurred. Inconsistent with the narrative. I was not a mother anymore. I was a plot hole they were trying to edit out. But they forgot that without the author. There is no story. The ceiling of the Motel 6 on the outskirts of Harbour Heights was stained with a brown watermark that looked like a bruised lung. I lay there all night, fully clothed, staring at it. I did not sleep. The humiliation of the iron gate slamming in my face kept replaying in my mind. But as the hours ticked by, the hot sting of tears began to cool into something harder, something colder. I spent 30 years working for the IRS. I spent my life hunting down people who thought they were smarter than the system, people who used their families as human shields for their financial crimes. I began to replay the conversations I had overheard at the few events I was allowed to attend. I remembered Olivia using phrases that sounded out of place for a socialite. She had talked about asset layering and trust structures with a sharpness that did not match her vacuous public persona. Why would they need to erase me so completely from the image if I was just an embarrassing relative? Unless my presence was a liability for reasons that had nothing to do with my wardrobe. When the sun came up, I did not drive back to Oklahoma. I splashed cold water on my face, drank a cup of bitter motel coffee, and drove to the downtown branch of First National Bank. This was the bank where I had signed the original loan guarantee for Ryan's startup more than 20 years ago. I walked up to the desk, my old ID badge from the federal government tucked into my wallet just in case. I need to see the full file on my accounts. I told the young branch manager. My name is Margaret Keene. He tapped on his keyboard, frowning. Miss Keene? We only show the personal checking account. But, well, do you want the statements for the trust as well? I see a lot of activity on the credit lines attached to it. My blood ran cold. What trust? I asked, keeping my voice steady. The Margaret Keene Family Trust, he said, looking confused. The one established 2 years ago. It is the primary guarantor for the Harbour Heights mortgage. I felt the room tilt. Print it, I said. Print everything, including the signature cards and the authorization forms. He hesitated. Ma'am, usually we need the trustee to I am the grantor. I cut him off, my voice dropping to that flat, dangerous tone I used to use on tax evaders, and under Banking Regulation Section 404 regarding personal data access. I have the right to see documents bearing my name and social security number. Print them now. 10 minutes later. I was sitting in my car with a stack of papers. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from rage. I flipped to the founding document of the trust. There, at the bottom, was a signature M. L. Keene. It looked like my signature. The loop on the L was almost perfect, but the slant was wrong. It leaned just a fraction of a degree too far to the right. I had not signed this. I had never signed this. I flipped to the asset schedule. The trust held 18% of the common stock in Nova Vantage Labs. The trustee was listed as an entity called Nova Bridge Wealth Management. I had never heard of them. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. Alan, I said, when the gruff voice answered. It's Maggie. I need a favor. You still have access to the deep public records database, the one we used to track shell companies, Maggie. I thought you were retired. Alan grumbled. I am coming out of retirement for one case. I said, look up a company called Nova Bridge Wealth Management and cross-reference the cap table filings for Nova Vantage Labs. Tell me if the numbers add up. I waited, staring at the glossy bank building. "This is messy. Maggie," Alan said after a few minutes of typing. "The filings show the founder shares are fully consolidated under Ryan Keane, but there is a footnote about a blind trust holding a major voting block. The math doesn't work unless someone is hiding a major stakeholder." I hung up. My mind raced back to the fireproof safe in my house in Ruston Falls. Sitting inside, gathering dust, was the original operating agreement for MK and Son Holdings LLC. It stated clearly that I owned 60% of the parent company. I had never signed that away. The picture was suddenly terrifyingly clear. Ryan and Olivia did not just want me out of the photos because I looked poor. They needed me to be a ghost because they had stolen my identity to build their fortune. They were using a fake version of me to hold the debt and the equity, while the real me was being pushed out the door. "You didn't just close the door on your mother?" "Ryan," I whispered to the windshield, my finger tracing the forged signature on the paper. "You closed the door on the only person who could have saved you from prison." I flew back to Ruston Falls the next morning. The red dirt of Oklahoma did not look like failure to me anymore. It looked like a fortress. I drove straight to Mr. Doyle's office on Main Street. The place still smelled of stale coffee and old paper, a comforting scent of bureaucracy that I had missed. I placed the original operating agreement on his cluttered desk. "Doyle," I said, leaning forward. "Look me in the eye. Do you remember ever filing an amendment to the MK and Son Holdings LLC agreement?" Doyle pushed his glasses up his nose, squinting at the document. "No. Maggie. You know I handle all your filings. We have not touched this since Ryan started the company in the garage." "Why, because," I said, my voice steady, "my son and his wife seem to think I don't own 60% of their empire anymore." Doyle logged into the Secretary of State's database. He clicked a few keys, and then he whistled low and long. "Well," he said, "according to the state of Oklahoma, Margaret L. Keene is still the managing member. If they filed changes in California or Delaware based on a transfer of ownership, they needed a document with your signature to do it. Send them a letter." I ordered. "A formal demand for production of documents. Tell the General Counsel of Novavantage that the majority shareholder would like to see the chain of title for her shares. Do not threaten to sue yet. Just ask." While Doyle drafted the letter, I stepped outside and called Alan. "Do it," I said. "File the anonymous tip with the SEC. Tell them there are material discrepancies in the beneficial ownership disclosures for the Novavantage IPO." "Are you sure?" Maggie Allen asked. "Once you ring that bell, you cannot unring it. It could kill the public offering." "They killed my family first," I said. "Now I am just correcting the paperwork." I spent the rest of the afternoon securing my own perimeter. I went to a small credit union across town, opened a new account solely in my name, and transferred every cent of my life savings into it. I was preparing for a siege. They would try to freeze me out, but I would not be caught without resources. 3 days later, the response from Novavantage's high-priced law firm arrived in Doyle's inbox. It was dripping with arrogance. "Dear Mr. Doyle, your client is clearly mistaken or suffering from memory issues. Ms. Keene signed a full stock power transfer 5 years ago. Please see the attached executed document." I opened the attachment on Doyle's ancient computer. It was a PDF of a stock transfer agreement. At the bottom was my signature. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. It was the same signature from the trust document I had seen at the bank. But this time, I noticed something else. The background of the signature block was a slightly different shade of white than the rest of the page. It was a digital artifact. "It is a copy and paste job," I said, pointing at the screen. They lifted my signature from an old birthday card or a check and pasted it onto the contract. They did not even bother to smooth out the compression noise. "That is a felony," Doyle whispered. "That is leverage." I corrected him. I did not scream. I did not cry. I saved the file and preserved the metadata. Then I called Sarah, a forensic handwriting expert I used to work with on tax fraud cases. "Sarah," I said, "I have a job for you. I need you to certify a forgery." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a pair of scissors and a glue stick. I was building a dossier. On one side of the notebook, I pasted the articles from Forbes and TechCrunch, where Ryan and Olivia bragged about their journey. We built this from nothing. Ryan was quoted as saying, "No handouts, no safety net, just pure grit." I designed the financial architecture myself. Olivia claimed in another interview, I wrote "lie" in red ink next to each quote. Then I turned my attention to the trust. I dug into the corporate registry for Nova Bridge Wealth Management. It sounded impressive, like a firm that handled billions. But when I pulled the incorporation papers from Delaware, the registered address was a virtual office in a strip mall. And the sole director was not a banker. It was Thomas Miller, Olivia's younger brother, a boy who had dropped out of college twice and now apparently managed the trust that owned my house and my company. I closed the notebook. The grief was gone, replaced by the cold, mechanical precision of an auditor. I was done begging for a seat at their table. I was going to let the system, the very system I had served for 30 years, grind them into dust. They thought money and public relations could rewrite reality. They were about to learn that in the end. The paperwork always wins. I was just the one pushing the first domino. The first domino fell with the silence of a paper envelope landing on a mahogany desk. I was not there to see it, but I read the deposition later. The Securities and Exchange Commission sent a formal inquiry to Nova Vantage Labs demanding a full explanation of their beneficial ownership structure. Inside the glass walls of the executive suite, the panic was immediate. Ryan and Olivia cancelled their weekend trip to Napa Valley. They locked themselves in the boardroom with 3 lawyers who charged $1,000 an hour. For the first time, the cameras were off, and the fear on their faces was real. 2 days later, I sat in a nondescript coffee shop near the Federal Building. Across from me sat Lena Shaw, a senior enforcement attorney for the SEC. She was sharp, tired, and did not have time for stories, but she made time for evidence. "Ms. Keene," Lena said, tapping her pen on the table. "You are alleging that the S1 filing for the IPO contains material misstatements regarding the cap table. That is a serious accusation." "It is not an accusation," I said, sliding a heavy binder across the table. "It is a fact. Here is the original LLC agreement showing my 60% ownership. Here is the forged transfer document your office received. And here are the bank statements for the Margaret Keene Family Trust." Lena opened the binder. Her eyes scanned the pages. She stopped at the trust documents. "This trust," I continued, pointing to the highlighted rows. "It is not just holding stock. Look at the outflows. Hundreds of thousands of dollars paid to consultants that don't exist. They are funneling company money into a trust under my name to evade taxes, then pulling it out for personal use. They are using my identity as a money laundering vehicle." Lena looked up at me. The skepticism was gone. If this is true, the IPO is dead. This is securities fraud, bank fraud, identity theft. And because they used the mail and wire systems, it is federal. The gears of the government grind slowly until they don't. A week later, I sat in my living room in Ruston Falls and turned on the business news channel. The headline flashed in bright red: FBI raids Nova Vantage headquarters. I watched as agents in blue windbreakers marched out of the building carrying boxes of files and computer servers. They were not just taking the company records. They were seizing the files of Nova Bridge Wealth Management. The camera zoomed in on a young man being escorted to a car, covering his face. It was Thomas, Olivia's brother. My phone rang. The screen showed Ryan. I picked it up and held it to my ear, saying nothing. Mom. Ryan's voice was ragged, broken by heavy breathing. Mom. What the hell did you do? They are everywhere. They took the servers. My lawyers say you are the whistleblower. You are destroying my life. No, I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with his panic. I am not destroying anything. I am just taking back what is mine. You shut the door. Ryan, I am just locking it. You don't understand, he stammered, sounding like a frightened child. Olivia, she said it was handled. We were going to pay you back eventually. Goodbye. Ryan. I hung up. The investigation moved faster than I anticipated. Lena shared the findings with me as the complaining witness. The digital forensics team had recovered deleted emails from Olivia's private server. They were damning. In one email chain, titled "The Mother Problem," Olivia had written to the legal team, "We need to make his mother's share disappear before the audit. Just scan her signature from the old Christmas cards. I need her gone from the books." But it was another email that made my blood boil. It was a draft proposal Olivia had sent to her brother. If the old hag stays quiet and disappears into her trailer park, maybe we can set up a small allowance for her. $500 a month should keep her in knitting supplies. But only if she signs a non-disclosure agreement. $500. They were building a billion-dollar empire on my credit, and they thought I was worth $500 and silence. The net widened. The investigators connected the dots to the Harbour Heights mansion. The mortgage had been secured using the assets of the fake trust as collateral. Since I had never authorized the trust, the loan was fraudulent. The bank was now a victim, and banks do not forgive. The final blow came on a Tuesday. A formal letter was issued by the legal department of Nova Vantage, leaked almost immediately to the press. Due to pending regulatory investigations and material uncertainties regarding corporate governance, the initial public offering of Nova Vantage Labs is postponed indefinitely. The stock market reacted instantly. The private valuation of the company plummeted. Major investors pulled their term sheets. The unicorn was bleeding out. I sat in my armchair, sipping hot tea, watching the news footage of Ryan and Olivia running from reporters to their waiting SUV. Olivia looked disheveled, shouting something at a cameraman, her perfect mask cracking. Ryan looked pale, like a ghost haunting his own life. I did not smile. There was no joy in seeing my son ruined. But there was a grim, cold satisfaction in knowing that the narrative was finally corrected. They wanted to erase me. Instead, they had written their own ending, and I was the only one holding the pen. 3 days after the raid, a knock sounded on my front door. It was hesitant and weak, barely audible over the wind rattling the siding of my small house in Ruston Falls. I did not need to check the peephole. I knew who was standing there. I opened the door. Ryan stood on the porch, soaked by the sudden Oklahoma drizzle. The irony was sharp enough to cut skin. Just weeks ago, I had been the one shivering outside his gate, begging for entry. Now, the tables had turned. But I did not feel triumphant. I just felt a heavy, dull ache in my chest. He looked ruined. His suit, usually tailored to perfection, was wrinkled and stained. His tie was loose, and the arrogance that usually defined his jawline had dissolved into exhaustion. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He walked into the living room, the room he used to say smelled like poverty, and collapsed onto the worn floral sofa. He put his head in his hands. "I am sorry about the gate," he said into his palms. "I am so sorry. Mum, I should not have let the guards do that." He looked up, his eyes rimmed with red, desperation flooding his face. "But you have to stop this. You have to tell the SEC it was a misunderstanding. The lawyers say if you withdraw your statement and sign a waiver, we can frame it as a clerical error. We can save the company. We can save Olivia." I sat in the armchair opposite him, keeping my back straight. "Is that why you are here, to ask me to lie for you again?" "It is not lying," he pleaded. "It is damage control. Ryan, look at me," I said, my voice hard. Did you know they were forging my name on the trust documents? Or was it all?" Olivia Ryan looked away, his gaze darting to the corner of the room. I didn't look too closely. Olivia handled the finances. She brought me papers to sign. She said it was just tax structuring. I just signed them. "You just signed them," I repeated. Suddenly, a memory forced its way to the surface. Ryan was 17 years old. He had won a regional essay contest that came with a scholarship. I had been so proud until I found the crumpled draft in his trash can. It was plagiarized. He had copied whole paragraphs from an old magazine article. When I confronted him then, he had cried and said he just wanted to win, that he deserved it more than the others. I realized then that the rot had started long ago. I had forgiven him too easily back then. I had taught him that results mattered more than integrity. "You knew," I said. It was not a question. Ryan slumped. I knew she was moving things around. I knew we needed you off the cap table. Why, I asked. I never asked for money. I never asked for control. "Why did you have to erase me because of the story?" Ryan shouted, the vein in his neck bulging. "The investors want a self-made genius. Mom. They don't want a mama's boy whose mother owns 60% of the stock because she mortgaged her house." "It looks weak," Olivia said. She said, if we wanted the magazine covers, if we wanted the billion-dollar valuation, you had to be gone. You had to be the past. "So you let her practice my signature," I said quietly. "You let strangers trace my name until they got it right, so you could pretend you did it all yourself." Ryan choked on a sob. He could not answer. I stood up and walked to the window. "I am going to give you a choice, Ryan. A choice you don't deserve." He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "I am separating you from Olivia," I said. "The SEC and the DOJ are going to want a head on a pike. It can be both of you, or it can be just her. If you agree to cooperate fully, if you confess everything and sign over your voting rights to me, restoring the original agreement, I will ask the prosecutors to treat you as a cooperating witness. You might avoid prison." "I can't," he whispered. "She is my wife. She is the mother of my children. She is a criminal who stole my identity." I snapped. "And you are her accomplice." Ryan buried his face in his hands again. His shoulders shook. You don't understand? She has a plan B. She told me last night. She said if it all blows up, we stick to the story that you are senile, that you signed the papers and forgot, that you are an old, confused woman trying to sabotage us for attention. She said no jury would believe a bitter old lady over a CEO. The air left the room. I felt a coldness settle over me that was absolute. They had planned to paint me as mentally incompetent. They were ready to destroy my mind to save their money. She really said that I asked. Ryan nodded, tears streaming down his face. I can't do it. Mum, I can't do that to you. But I am scared. I walked over to him. For the first time in years, I saw the little boy who used to scrape mud off his shoes, terrified of being stuck. I put a hand on his shoulder. It was heavy with judgment, but it was still his mother's hand. Then you have to choose right now, I said. You can protect the woman who wants to call your mother crazy, or you can be the man I thought I raised. But the door is closing. Ryan. And this time, I am the one holding the handle. He grabbed my hand and pressed it to his forehead, weeping uncontrollably. I stood there, feeling the damp heat of his tears. Knowing that I was about to dismantle his life to save his soul. The emergency board meeting of Nova Vantage Labs did not take place in the glass tower where my son played king. It was held in a windowless conference room at the Four Seasons downtown, neutral ground for a corporate execution. I sat at the far end of the long table. To my left sat the lawyers from the SEC. To my right were the major institutional investors. Men who controlled billions of dollars and looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Ryan and Olivia sat on the opposite side. They looked like prisoners of war. Mr. Henderson, the independent forensic counsel, stood up and dimmed the lights. A projector threw an image of a signature onto the screen. It was the signature from the stock transfer agreement. As you can see, Henderson said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. The variance in pen pressure and stroke angle confirms that this signature is a digital fabrication. We have identified the source file. It was lifted from a birthday card sent by Mrs. Margaret Keene 5 years ago. The metadata on the transfer document proves it was created on a computer registered to Mrs. Olivia Keene. The room went deadly silent. Olivia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes widening in a performance of shock that would have impressed Broadway. I am horrified, she stammered, looking around the room for an ally. We had a junior legal aid back then. He must have cut corners. I trusted the system. I trusted that the paperwork was being handled correctly. How could I possibly know? She managed to squeeze out a tear. It rolled perfectly down her cheek. I did not let it land. I stood up. I was wearing a simple grey suit I had bought at a discount store. But in that moment, I felt taller than anyone in the room. Stop it. Olivia, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a knife. There was no junior legal aid. There was just you, my son, and a scanner. I turned to the shareholders. 20 years ago. I did not sign a digital pad. I signed a second mortgage on my home in Oklahoma. I risked the only roof I had so my son could buy servers. I was the first investor. And for the last 5 years, I have been erased from the company history because I did not look the part. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was yellowed with age. You claim this is all a misunderstanding about paperwork? I said, sliding the paper down the table toward the lead investor. But this is an addendum Ryan signed 4 years ago. It states clearly that while the public relations narrative may simplify the founding story for marketing purposes, the legal ownership structure remains 60% with Margaret Keane. Ryan froze. He stared at the paper. He had signed it in a moment of guilt, a secret insurance policy against his own lies, hoping it would never see the light of day. Now, it was the nail in his coffin. You knew, the lead investor said, looking at Ryan with disgust. You knew she was the majority owner, and you let your wife forge documents to hide it. Ryan lowered his head. He did not speak. The silence from him was a confession. The representative from the SEC cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, the position of the Commission is clear. If this company remains under its current leadership, we will move forward with criminal charges against the organization for securities fraud. The only way NovaVantage survives today is if there is a total purge. The lead investor turned to me, Mrs. Keane. Technically, you control the majority of the voting shares. If we agree to this restructuring, will you step in as interim chair of the board? We need someone with clean hands to signal cooperation to the authorities. I looked at Ryan. He was looking at his hands. I looked at Olivia. She was vibrating with rage. I will do it, I said. But on one condition. No layoffs for the engineering staff or the support team. They are not the ones who lied. Agreed, the investor said. All in favor of removing Ryan Keane as CEO and Olivia Keane from all executive functions. Effective immediately. Every hand in the room went up, including mine. Olivia snapped. She slammed her hands on the table, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. You cannot be serious, she screamed, her voice cracking. You are going to let her run this company. She is a nobody. She buys her clothes at Walmart. She is just an old woman from a hick town in Oklahoma. She doesn't fit the image. She will ruin the brand. The brand is already ruined. Olivia, I said coldly, I am here to save the business. Security guards stepped forward. One of them took Olivia by the elbow. She thrashed against him, shouting obscenities that made the lawyers flinch. Ryan stood up slowly, looking like a man waking up from a long coma. He looked at me, then at his wife being dragged toward the door. He did not follow her. He just stood there, stripped of his title, stripped of his power, finally seeing the wreckage he had allowed. Get them out, I said to the guards. As the heavy doors of the conference room closed behind them, blocking out Olivia's screams. I sat down at the head of the table. I picked up the gavel that had been sitting in front of my son. It felt heavy. It felt cold. It felt like justice. The federal indictment came down like a hammer, shattering the last remnants of the facade. Olivia was facing charges for bank fraud and securities fraud, and her high-priced defense team had concocted a desperate strategy. They wanted to pin everything on Thomas, her brother, who had conveniently fled to a non-extradition country with a suitcase full of cash. It was a classic cutthroat move. Olivia would claim she was a victim of her brother's machinations, but for the story to hold water, she needed Ryan to testify that Thomas was the sole architect of the financial crimes. Ryan came to me that evening. He looked thinner, his eyes hollowed out by sleepless nights. We sat on the porch of my small house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The lawyers say if I corroborate her story, If I say Thomas did it all, I could walk away with probation, maybe less. But I know you will never forgive me. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. This is not about my forgiveness. Ryan, it is about you. What kind of man do you want to be? The kind who hides behind a lie to save his own skin, or the kind who takes responsibility? He did not answer immediately. We walked down to the riverbank, the red dirt crunching under our shoes. It was the same path I used to walk when I was a young auditor, hated by half the town because I refused to look the other way when local business owners cheated on their taxes. When I first started at the IRS, I told him, I had to audit the man who ran the grocery store where we bought our milk. He was a nice man. He gave you free candy. But he was stealing from the government. Everyone told me to let it go. They said, Maggie, don't be cruel. But the law is not cruel. Ryan, the law is the only thing that treats everyone the same. I audited him. It broke my heart. But I slept at night. Ryan kicked a stone into the water. There is something I never told you, he said, his voice trembling. Back in the beginning, when we were desperate for ad money, Olivia wanted to use your credit card information. She had your numbers from when you bought me the laptop. She said we could run $50,000 in ads and pay it back before you noticed. I stopped walking. And what did you do? I told her no. Ryan said, looking at me with wet eyes. I told her I would not steal from my mother. I fought her on it. I didn't know. I didn't know she and Thomas went behind my back and did it anyway through the trust later. I was weak. Mum, I didn't stop her. But I didn't say yes to that. It was a small sliver of redemption, a shade of grey in a black and white portrait of betrayal. He had a conscience, somewhere buried under the layers of ambition and fear. I reached into my purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. This is my new will. Ryan, I drafted it this morning. He looked at it, confused. If you go into that courtroom and lie to save Olivia, I said, my voice steady, if you choose to continue this charade, this envelope stays sealed, and you are cut out of everything. Not just the company, but my personal assets. I do not want my money feeding a lifetime of lies. But if you tell the truth, if you take your punishment like a man, we can talk about the future. Ryan stared at the envelope. He was standing on a precipice. On one side was safety built on deceit. On the other was ruin. But it was an honest ruin. He took a deep breath, and for a moment, he looked like he was suffocating. Then, he nodded. I am done running, he whispered. That night, Ryan called his lawyer. I listened from the kitchen as he spoke, his voice gaining strength with every sentence. He told them he would not support Olivia's false narrative. He told them he would testify to the full extent of his own involvement and hers. Then he sent an email to the prosecutor, copying me, offering his laptop and his old phone as evidence. The backlash was instant. My phone rang 10 minutes later. It was Olivia. You witch, she screamed, the sound distorting through the speaker. You poisoned him against me. He would never do this. He loves me. You are ruining our family because you are jealous. If he testifies, I will destroy him. Do you hear me? I will. I listened until she ran out of breath. Olivia, I said, my voice cold as the grave. My son chose this himself. You cannot control him anymore, and you certainly cannot control me. I hung up. The next morning, a car pulled up to my driveway. Ryan got out, carrying his youngest daughter, while his son walked beside him, holding a toy dinosaur. They looked confused, displaced by the storm that had torn their luxury life apart. Ryan looked at me, his face pale but set with a new resolve. He knelt down to his children. "Kids," he said softly, "we are going to stay with Grandma for a while." Grandma. Well, Grandma is going to help Dad tell everyone the truth. I opened the screen door and stepped out. The little girl ran to me, burying her face in my skirt. I wrapped my arms around her, looking over her head at my son. We had lost the empire. We had lost the mansion. But as I looked at Ryan standing there in the morning light, stripped of his pretenses, I knew we had finally won something far more valuable. The door was open, and this time, it was staying open. The trial of the United States versus Olivia Keane was not the media circus she had hoped for. It was a surgical dismantling of a life built on smoke and mirrors. I sat in the witness box, wearing my best Sunday suit, facing a jury of 12 strangers, Olivia's defense attorney, a man whose smile cost more than my car, tried to paint me as a vindictive mother scorned by her son's success. Ms. Keane, he sneered, pacing in front of the jury box. Isn't it true that you are simply bitter because you were excluded from the glamorous life your son built? Isn't this entire testimony just a way to punish them for not inviting you to parties? I adjusted my glasses and looked at him with the same detached focus I used to reserve for tax cheats. On November 12th, 2021, a transfer of assets was initiated from the trust bearing my name. The metadata shows the document was created at 3 a.m. from an IP address registered to the defendant. Bitterness does not forge signatures. Counselor. Computers do. The jury took notes. The lawyer sat down. Then came Ryan. When he took the stand, he did not look at his wife. He looked at the floor. He admitted everything. "I was ashamed," Ryan said, his voice trembling into the microphone. "I let my shame about coming from a poor town convince me to erase the woman who laid every brick of my foundation. I was a coward. I am not a victim here. I am just sorry. But the final nail in the coffin did not come from us. It came from the prosecutor." In a twist that made the courtroom gasp, she produced encrypted chats between Olivia and a foreign venture fund. Olivia had not just been skimming money. She had been negotiating to sell the proprietary algorithm of Nova Vantage Labs and flee the country if the IPO failed. She was planning to leave Ryan and the children behind with the debt. Olivia snapped. She stood up, her face twisted and ugly. "You think family is sacred?" She shrieked at the judge. "It is a tool. It is just a marketing tool to sell a narrative to investors. None of you understand how the world works." The judge hammered his gavel. The jury did not need long. Guilty on all counts. Bank fraud. Securities fraud. Conspiracy. Olivia was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. In the aftermath, the court approved a restructuring plan. My original ownership in the holding company was restored. I did not keep it. I signed a deal to sell the majority stake to a conglomerate that promised to clean house, saving the jobs of the employees, but removing the Keane family from control. I walked away with a check that was larger than I could ever spend. But that was not the victory. The victory was in the mailbox. Weeks after the sentencing, Ryan was preparing to move out of the Harbor Heights mansion. He assumed the bank would foreclose. Instead, he received a notice from a new creditor, Keane Recovery LLC. I met him in the empty living room where the furniture had already been sold. "You bought the debt?" Ryan asked, holding the letter, his eyes wide. You own the mortgage. I bought it through a fund in Ruston Falls, I said. And now I am giving you a choice. You can keep this house. Keep pretending to be something you are not, and I will foreclose on you immediately. Or you can sell it, pay off the principal, and use what is left to buy a modest house near me. A real home for the kids. Ryan looked at the high ceilings, the marble floors, and the cold, echoing emptiness of the life he had built. He dropped the keys on the counter. I am done with this place, he said, on moving day. I stood outside the massive iron gates. They were open. My grandchildren ran out, bypassing the luxury cars, and threw themselves into my arms. Ryan walked behind them, pulling a single suitcase. He stopped and looked back at the mansion one last time. It was just a building now. The spell was broken. He walked through the gates and stood beside me. Ready, Mom. Ready, I said. I turned my back on the mansion, behind us. The heavy iron gates began to close, the metal groaning as they sealed off the past. I did not watch them shut. I was too busy holding the hands of the future. The doors that mattered were finally open. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from. So please drop your location in the comments below to share your thoughts with our community. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel. Smash that like button and hit the hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.